Hi everyone, I'm Jayne at Rock and Worms. Thanks for joining me today. What I'm going to be talking to you about is how to do an emergency bin bedding refresh. This comes into play when you've let your bin go too long and it's full of castings, and those castings are starting to get sticky, which they tend to do when the worms are eating and pooping them and then re-eating them and pooping them again. It's kind of disgusting, but that's what they do. And then the castings get sticky, they're harder to sift, and you have a whole bin full of worms, and you really need to get some fresh bedding in there and start getting your bin back to where you want it to be. So this will combine a couple different methods and tools that you may already be familiar with. If not, we'll talk about them a little bit. So let's get started. This is the bin I'm going to be working on. Came right off my shelf, so let's see what it looks like. And you know what? I got to put my glasses on. Hold on. Okay. So you can see that there's a lot of castings on the top. They've been working on the newspaper. Let's peel it back. I don't care that it falls apart. I'm going to end up replacing it anyways. I just want to move most of it out of the way, because the method I'm going to be choosing to do with you has to do with sifting. So I want to get some of that paper out of the way. So let's see, there's just a ton of worms in here. And what I'm going to do is start sifting some of this out, and it's really quite damp. But you can see there's just castings everywhere. And I've got to get fresh bedding into this bin and get back to a more normal bin setup, okay, where there's fresh bedding and fresh food, and the worms can, live more happily and healthier than being in their castings all the time. Okay, so I'm really going to shake this up. I don't expect to get a lot of sift out because it is damp, but anything I can get out will give me room to put fresh bedding into the working end of this bin. Now I'm going to do a couple sifts here. Like I said, I don't think I'm going to be able to get out very much, but we're going to get what we can. Now the trick to sifting when you have all of these worms is to do it quick, because the longer the worms sit in the sieve, the more chance they have to go down through the holes and get stuck, and it just becomes more work for you, and it increases the potential that a worm could get damaged. So keep them moving and do it as quickly as you can. Okay, so why would you even have this kind of situation where you have a bin just full of castings that are, several weeks, a month or more past their prime sifting? Well, for you, and sometimes for me, but it can be because, life got busy. You got work, you got family obligations, maybe you had to travel, maybe you got sick, and the garden came in and you're busy, canning and freezing, and that stuff needs to be done right away because you don't want to lose your crop, and you're just not able to get back to your worm bins as quickly as you want or need to. So you might come to a situation where your castings are getting reused too many times by your worms. Now for me, as you probably are aware, if you watch any of my recent videos, I ran out of pre-composted bedding, and I didn't think about making and using prepared bedding quick enough, and here I am now. Okay, so I do have some pre-composted bedding now available to me that I've made, and I want to start again getting my bins back to a more normal, stable state. Okay. Now, like I said, I am sifting out because the method I'm choosing to do will involve moving the bin contents down to the empty space and putting fresh bedding into this end so the worms can move down. It's kind of, it's using the horizontal method. It's using the wedge method. So that's one of the tools I'm going to be using to address this situation. But it's not the only tool I'll be using. I'll talk about the other ones when I get there. Okay. Now, there's other things you can do to address this type of situation. You can see again how kind of clumpy and sticky. It's more than them just being wet. It's them being used multiple times by the worms as part of their, hey, I eat bedding. Not just food, but bedding, because they've always had food. And we'll see some of that when I get down to the working end of the bin as well. Okay, so another thing I could have chosen to do is mix in dry ingredients, such as dry cardboard shred, dry leaves, dry coconut coir, dry peat moss, anything that's dry that I can mix into the bin to start declumping. I'm not sure drying the castings it would be the correct term, but it would be declumping the castings. So one, the worms can travel. See how many worms are in here. So the worms can travel out of the casting clumps easier and move down to a feed section so you can bait them out or put in new bedding. But I chose, I flung this over here. I chose not to use the dry bedding additive method to address the situation because mainly my bins are already as full as I want them to be. Because if I add more bedding in, hold on, let me show you this. So I generally don't like my bins to get above this ridge line, okay? It's an arbitrary thing, it's what I choose, but I choose it, here I got a little worm on the edge here. I choose it because anything above this line, the bin becomes heavier and more awkward for me to handle. And also, when I'm working in the bin, since the bedding is much higher, I tend to spill over the edges and make an even bigger mess than I normally do. So I like to keep it at that ridge line or below, just for my own way I work. Now, again, you might, not mind that your bin is fuller or heavier, but for me it presents a problem. And just so you have an idea, the bin depth I'm talking about here is about 2 inches, 2.5 inches, because the total bin depth is not quite 6 inches. Okay, so if that gives you an idea. But honestly, it really just depends on what your bin depth and size is and how you can manage it. All right. You can see I am not getting a lot sifted out, but at the same time, I have, opened up some area. So this bin is just wetter and more difficult than some of my other bins that I've been doing this with over the last several days. So of course the one I picked to do a video on is the one that's going to give me the most problems. Of course it is. But there it is. That's the reality, folks. Okay, so this bin here is like a holding place where I've just dumped the contents that went through the 1/8 inch screen. Did not go through the 1/12 inch screen. I'm not expecting anything to go through the 1/12 inch screen, and I'm just holding that. And this is the material that did not go through the screen at all. Okay, and again, I'm using a 1/8 inch. If you used a 1/4 inch, you know, much more of this material would go through, but you would also be passing through a lot of worms, which again is not something I want to do. All right, so what am I going to do next? I am going to set that aside. All right, now I'm going to take this bin with these really sticky, heavy castings, and I'm just going to gently break them apart, which will aerate them, which will, you know, help reduce the clumping at least a little bit, and get these worms moving again if they've been stuck in any clumpy areas, because I'm going to put new bedding down on the working end of the bin, feed the working end of the bin, and hopefully these worms will start moving their little worm butts out of this area so I can dry it down better and sift it, and then therefore continue to add fresh bedding, because I'll just do this process again in, you know, a handful of days, a week, whenever I get back to it. Hopefully it will be relatively soon. Now I do want you to see these worms, even though this is, you know, again, you know, quite wet, quite heavy, quite clumpy. The worms are happy. You know, they're moving around. They're, you know, doing their little worm thing. So this type of environment is not a negative to them. I'm not hurting the worms. I'm just slowing down me getting what I want, which is castings. Now I'm starting to get into the feed zone here. I did feed these guys, I believe, on the 6th of July. So a couple of weeks ago. Here's a mango seed that's been in here forever. Worm's still working on it. That's a super long food. They'll eventually get into it. A pumpkin stem that again has been in here a long time, but you can see they've hollowed it out. So they're getting in there and working on it. And no signs of any food from that feed. Okay, so giving them fresh bedding. Look at how wet this is, you know. Yeah, so giving them fresh bedding, giving them fresh food is really going to motivate them, I hope, to move down to this end of the bin, vacating the other end, and then I can come back and sift. Okay, good enough. Okay. Now, so I'm going to do a quick feed here. What I'm going to do is show you my pre-compost over here in this bucket. This is what I'm going to be using. This is my pre-compost with sifted cow manure in it. I made that up earlier today just to show you it's at 82 degrees, so well within the safe zone for the worms. And I'm going to take some of this and dump it as a layer. There we go. And again, they're going to go crazy for this new bedding, because, you know, they don't mind being in their old castings so much, but it actually isn't their preference. They'd rather have, you know, new fresh biota. There's a little worm. Okay, put down my napkin because I like to do that. Here is some fast food, which again will also be a big draw for them. This is lettuce and cabbage leaves that I've frozen, and now it's defrosted, or at least this section is. This section's still frozen. I'm squeezing it out to remove excess liquid because I don't want to be putting in any additional moisture into this bin if I don't have to. The compost with the cow manure I did rehydrate, and it has, you know, excellent moisture level already. So adding in more moisture is defeating my own purpose here. Okay, so let me give them a quick feed, and then we're going to talk about what I'm going to do with the materials I sifted out. I'm going to put in some azomite, some agricultural lime. The first stuff I put in was a little worm chow. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put in back in the bin material that did not go through the sifter at all. Okay. And I'm going to spread that out. Again, you can see all the worms in there. I'm getting back close to my self-imposed limit of the ridge here. And here's a little trick I want to show you. I've shown this once before in a video, but it's worth repeating. Sometimes when you're moving your worms or sifting, you get a lot of worms stuck to the bottom of, you know, your regular worm bin or a bin that you're using as a holding container. And getting them off is kind of difficult. You know, you don't want to squish them with your fingers too much. And if I use a brush, which would be my go-to tool, they're going to get stuck in the bristles, and that doesn't help them or me either. So what I found is if I take a handful of my bedding, and again, this could be coconut coir, it could be peat moss, it could be shredded cardboard, you know, whatever you use for your bedding that is a little bit on the, you know, drier side, not dry, but on the drier side, and gently just move it around the bottom of your bin, you will get off very easily most of your worms, right? So that's kind of handy. Yeah, a couple will, you know, be persnickety and stay, but you got off the vast majority. And then what you can do now is come back and see how easy that cleans off. So there's a tip for you. Use your bedding to get worms out of your bins when they're stuck to the sides. Now I'll come back and clean that out. I got to come back and clean out the sieves as well because I do have worms in here as well. But okay, so I'm going to close this up and then we're going to move on to doing what am I going to do with this sifted material, because I still have a lot of worms in there, right? So this actually goes on the top of that. This is the one I wanted because there's a lot of worms on here too. I'm going to quickly put a paper on it because I do want to show you that is what I do. Put some paper on it. And these worms are done. I'll put label on it so I know what I'm doing, but I'll do that after. Okay, so what am I gonna do with this stuff? All right, it's beautiful castings. I mean, you can't argue with that. I'm just concerned that there's a lot of wisps in here that came through. So now I'm gonna use a method to bait them out by putting them into a new bin. With, again, some new bedding, and not so bad. Not a lot of worms down here, but there are some. See, there's one right there. So there are little worms in this material, okay? Again, I'll take care of that after. I want to be conscious of your time. So this isn't very much material in this bin, but guess what? I've got 3 more bins I have to do, and when I get that material, I will put that in as well, okay? So the baiting part is to have the worms with the, you know, the wisps and the babies in this end, and then use, you know, a layer of compost here. And because they're babies, I would use more like just worm chow, and I don't mind mixing it in because they're going to be in here for a little while, several weeks. So, you know, I'll just add the new stuff on top of it. And then I'm going to, you know, put the top on and let the worms in the sifted area come over to the new bedding area. And this is very much using a bait cup method. This is the second tool that I'm using to address my need to refresh the bedding in my worm bins as quickly as I can, because I'm baiting the worms that are babies and hatching cocoons into this new area where I'll be able to scoop them out and put them back into their original bins. Or I could decide just to, you know, start a new worm bin. That's cool too. All right. So that's what this process is that I'm using to quickly address a situation where my castings in my existing worm bins have gotten a little bit older, a little bit stickier, and I want to still sift out the castings as quickly as I can. Okay, because again, there's other ways you can do this, but this is the method that I'm choosing to use this time. All right, so if you have any questions, issues, you know, please like and subscribe. I really appreciate that as well. Let's have those conversations, and I hope to see you again on the next video. Thank you very much. I am Jayne, and I'm yours in the dirt.